Okay, welcome back to the Happily Different podcast, where we unpack the interesting and unorthodox ways people approach their businesses and their lives. My name is Ryan Jaskowitz. I'm your host, as well as CEO of 12-5 Capital, a non-bank finance company, helping companies accelerate the progress they are trying to make in their businesses and their lives. We have a fun one today. Today's guest is co-founder of Fernway, an elevated cannabis brand out of Massachusetts. Prior to co-founding Fernway, he worked as digital media producer for The Moth, which is the storytelling organization that started 25 years ago in NYC. And I'm excited to jump in and ask a bunch of questions about that. Liam O'Brien, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Really appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, appreciate it. So in doing some research on you, which there's another Liam O'Brien, I think a famous actor. There's a lot of Liam O'Briens. Yep. Let's just say that. Yeah. Okay. So I was doing,
famous, it took a little. I think he's like a famous anime voice actor.
Yeah, something wild like that. And, obviously that makes research a little more difficult. But in doing some research on you, I noticed you went to Hopkins School, which for some reason I double clicked on that, which I read was started something like 362 years ago with a ton of famous dignitaries and alumni and things like that. Can you give me like the quick tutorial on Hopkins School and how that all came about and what that was like?
Yeah, sure. And it's funny because that is actually where I met one of my fellow co-founders, Kit, our CEO, and he and me and Kevin, one of our other co-founders, we all went to high school together there. Although I actually knew Kevin from before that because Kevin used to take violin lessons from my mom.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, I mean, it was a high school in New Haven, Connecticut. It was a private high school, and I would say that for me, I think I'm really glad it was a day school because I don't think I was the boarding school type. But what I'd say it was really helpful for, in retrospect, was really putting me in a position where I was, let's say, forced to excel. It was a pretty high pressure environment, to be honest. Like it was a small school. I think we were less than 100 people in my graduating class, including two of my three co-founders. And,
wow.
One of the things that, everyone was really high achieving. And, for me, I think it was an opportunity to sort of go from being a big fish in a small pond to being a small fish in a small pond, where there was a lot of pressure to perform. But in my case, I honestly am really grateful for it because, I started, for example, after I went to college, I would talk to people and sort of talk about my high school experience. And I would realize like, damn, like most of my classmates here at college they had a lot less homework than we did in high school. And just, I think now looking back, especially, as an entrepreneur where I'm working harder than I've ever worked in my life. I think at the time, I certainly felt exhausted and I certainly felt like it was a lot of pressure to be put on a young kid. But for me, I think I'm thankful for it because I think that's honestly, I can tell you honestly that is where I thrive nowadays. And it's where my two co-founders who I went to that school with thrive. So I think that in general, I think I look back on it a lot more fondly now because of, all of the opportunities that it's brought me. And also I think just the opportunity that I had early on to really see the result of hard work and of being pushed to excel and being in a highly competitive space. It's somewhere where I now feel that type of environment is one where I feel a lot more comfortable than I think I would have if I'd gone to a different school.
Yeah, no question. That's really interesting. Thanks for that. And I think that, that line between too much and too little is such a thin line sometimes, especially when it comes to kids and education and all that, right? I'm sure at the time, sure. And I'm sure there's people who had the same experience as you would say, that was too much for us or that was too much for me, but it's such an individualized experience. And it's fascinating to me how these hard trials or challenges when you look back on them, if you take the right view on them, looking at it now, it makes it a lot easier, like you said, to work through challenges of running a business, right? The crazy expectations of running a business. It's almost like you've been steeled to it at a young age, in a way that, can go the wrong way. I bet. I'm sure there's plenty of people who went to that school that didn't end up in the situation you're in right now. But I was just fascinated because I went to public high school, and I would, no offense to my school if you end up looking it up, but it wasn't the greatest public high school either. So like even then it wasn't, the top school district. So.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a good point about how, my experience certainly is not, it's not universal. I think there are a lot of people who, when they're, they look back on their time in high school, with, let's say, less rosy glasses than I might. And I think part of that is, again, that I find myself in this really unique professional situation with being a cannabis entrepreneur. And also I think because, I still am so close with the people that I went to high school with. And I think that's something that is also, I've realized as I've grown older is also not universal. And sometimes it's universal. Sometimes, people are close with the people they went to high school with, but they resent that because, they wish that they'd, found a new crowd. So yeah. I think I look back on that time now, certainly with a different eye, and think I'm really thankful that I had the opportunity to not just, be around these people who have become so important to me and so vital to, the success of my business and to the personal growth that I've experienced as a result. But, you make a good point, which is that, I was in the public school, district, or I was in public school through junior high school. And what happened was that, the high school in my town ended up having like a series of just disastrous, occurrences with the school board. There was to be honest, it's hard for me to remember, but basically there were like 27 or some giant amount of budgets that were just voted down, because I think the PTA had lost confidence in the school board. And so my parents saw that happening. They were like, all right, you know what? We're going to put you in this high school. And at the time, I was in 8th grade. I was like, cool, like whatever you want me to do, mom and dad, like I'm all for it. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I had no idea what it was going to involve as far as the academic performance and the opportunity and the challenge. And, again, I look back on it and I think I'm really thankful that my parents both, took the initiative, but also, that I was fortunate enough to be able to go to such a place. And, I know that's also not universal. And I think that I have even more of an opportunity to really be thankful for my good fortune.
For sure. And that's funny. You say, like most 8th graders, I just said, let's go with it. Let's see what happens. And I think that's like not like most 8th graders. If I can see where I know a few 8th graders, and my kids are, unfortunately rapidly approaching that age in the next few years. And I don't think they would be saying the same things to me. So it says something to your nature probably, which we can dive into a little bit here. But you talked about your parents and them seeing very quickly that, oh, this is not what we signed up for when we chose to live here, whenever that happened, right? This is not what we're looking for our child. So we're going to put them in, I'm guessing at big expense to them, through both financially and I'm sure mentally and physically was difficult too. So talk to me a little bit about your parents. What did they do for a living in that area?
So my folks, so my dad was a lawyer. He's retired now, but he was an attorney. And my mom, I can't say was because she still is a full-time violinist and working musician.
Oh, that's cool. You said she did gave lessons to one of your co-founders. What sort of violin did she play, and where does she play?
So my mom has been a musician my entire life. It was an incredible environment to grow up in, both just from a cultural perspective, but also just to be able to sort of see the way that artists make their living, to be able to really see it from behind the scenes. And so, my entire life, my mother has been teaching lessons. She's been playing solo gigs. She plays with ensembles. She played with the symphony for a number of years. That's cool. She loves music. She loves playing the violin. And, it's something that, she still does. Every time I talk to her, she tells me about all the gigs that she's booked out. She's in her mid 70s, but she still loves to play. And I think for her, seeing her devotion and her enjoyment of the hard work of both building your own business and really going out there and winning hearts and minds and finding clients and winning them over and doing so again, like as a solo owner, is I think something that really imprinted on me, because it was something that I was witnessing all the time growing up. And I think that from my dad, I also really, I think, saw his incredibly high work ethic. He's someone who, he was actually a musician before he was a lawyer. He and my mom met in a band out in California back in the 1970s. So,
Awesome.
he's always been someone who's loved art and culture and really, impressed on me the values of those things. But at the same time, like he found a position in the corporate world, and he loves the law. And I think for him, watching, how hard he worked and, the ability, for him, like make a career shift, relatively late in life. He went to law school when he was in his late 30s. I think
Wow.
was, again, just another reminder that it's never too late to make a shift. And I think in his case, I watched him work as hard as he did over the many years, and what it brought to my family. And it was, not to be corny, but I think it really made me feel hopeful about the opportunity of, the concept of building a career, even when I was young. And he never, pressured me to go to law school or anything like that. So I was never feeling like, oh, I got to do exactly what my dad or what my mom did. Both my parents were very active in encouraging me to do extracurriculars. So, I played musical instruments. I did, I sang in choirs. I played trumpet for a while, played piano for a while.
Nice.
I did, I was in the drama club in high school. I took fencing for a semester. And I again, it's funny because I don't play music anymore. And I don't play sports, but at the same time, I am really fortunate and I'm really thankful that my parents pushed me to do that, because I think that what that did was really just helped me build my curiosity for different experiences and different types of people.
I love what you just said there. Many things that I'd love to unpack there. First off, I'm gonna stop you and tell you it's not corny to talk about your parents and talk about what an experience that is, because I'm fascinated by it. It could just be where I'm at in life, where I'm a father of 3 kids, that are one's almost 10, 8, and 5, and so I learned very early on that they're constantly recording or imprinting or all the things I'm doing, right? And it's never about the things I say. Almost never do they record. I mean, they're recording the things I say, of course, but almost never do they put that in practice. What they put into practice is the modeling of what I do, right? So do I, what are the things I'm doing that are that they're viewing that they then do themselves, right? And I see little bits of that time and again. I always assume I can just tell them what to do. Instead, I have to show them what to do. And I find that fascinating, especially obviously you had sounds like 2 great parents at home, but your mom, especially the musician thing is really interesting to me. And I think it plays to the entrepreneurship, because everyone assumes being an entrepreneur is this like high flying, really exciting, lots of money, lots of ups and downs and things like this. And really it comes down to, your mom was showing up you can't be a musician unless you show up every single day, right? Whether that's for the role you're in, whether that's for whatever it might be, you need to show up every single day and show up every single day in practice, or you lose it, or whatever it might be. So I find it fascinating that, how you can take something so cultural like music and it translates to you showing up every day for Fernway or whatever organization you're in at the time.
Yeah. I mean, it's, again, it can seem like a cliche, like something out of a business book, but I think I can just so much more appreciate the hard work that was being done, by my parents when they were my age. Now that I'm doing it, albeit in a very different context. I think the cannabis industry is one that, it has a deep degree of strangeness, because it's so new. But at the same time, I think that my parents are, when I told them, hey guys, I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to start a cannabis business. The first thing I said after that was, and I'm going to do it with Kit and Kevin. And they were like, oh, Well, we know those guys. You went to high school with them. That sounds awesome.
Yeah, that's cool. Well, it sounds like they were super supportive. So kudos to them for
Yes,
being great parents. So hopefully
I'm
they
very
listen.
thankful to them,
And
yes.
I'm learning from them. So just moving on a little bit, just a little more on you personally. And this is more selfish because I noticed, obviously, we talked about a little bit how you worked for the Moth. And the Moth, for those that don't know, is a nonprofit dedicated to the art and craft of storytelling. It's about sort of like, I think that you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the nexus of the Moth was, or not the genesis of the Moth, I should say, was trying to recreate the old salons of the 1800s, 1900s of storytelling and bringing people in a room and hearing people's stories and learning from them. Talk to me a little bit about how you made your way there.
Well, it was I'll be completely honest. It was in the aftermath of getting laid off that I was looking for a new job. And I was in advertising for a brief, disastrous period. Turned out that it was not the right fit for me. And so what I did was, after I got laid off from the company that I was at, I started looking around, and I considered going back to my previous career, or my previous industry, which was books and publishing. And I applied and I interviewed at a few places, but I had left that industry for a reason. I was looking to move on, to experience, something bigger, something newer, something more outside my comfort zone. And the role at the Moth was one that really hit my strengths. It was really focused on digital media and social media, which I'd really found a great deal of passion for in my previous roles in books and publishing. And it was also the Moth is an incredibly unique company because it's a nonprofit, and it was formed, about 25 years ago. And it went from this sort of small, scrappy arts nonprofit to what is really an international brand. And so when I came on, it's one, they have one of the most listened to podcasts. They've got books on the New York Times bestseller list. But at the same time, it still had and they also have like events going on all over the country and internationally, like every single week. It is a tremendous, feat of logistics and coordination, as well as just, pure love of the art form of storytelling. And I think that being able to work at a company like that also still had this very like small, almost startup-y feel, was really for me a wonderful place to land, because not only was everyone there, really interesting and fascinated with the work they were doing and brought their own degree of experience and their diversity of experience to the table, but the company by that point had expanded into a number of different enterprises. It wasn't just the radio show and the live performances. It was also, books. It was corporate training classes. It was educational programs. It was community community. What's the word I'm looking for here? Like their community program where they would work with nonprofits that were servicing like local and underserved communities. I got to travel to Flint, Michigan, for their first event in Flint, Michigan. That was fascinating. I'd never been to Michigan before. I'd never seen the Great Lakes before.
Really?
I got to, yeah. Oh yeah. It was,
I was born in Michigan. I'm a Michigander at heart. I was born in Bay City, which actually Bay City is like 45 minutes from Flint. I had the joy of, for those that haven't seen the Great Lakes, I always talk about this, but I had the joy this past week of flying a bunch of my team into town. We had our team retreat. We decided to do it here in Chicago. And that the look on their face when they first see Lake Michigan or any of these Great Lakes is just my favorite thing in the world. Just so expansive, so huge. So it's pretty interesting to me that you hadn't made it there before the Moth. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, well, it was, and again, like it was a company where I felt like I'd had a chance to really start over in a new space that both brought a lot of what I loved from books and publishing, which was, a focus on art and culture and on people and the interesting stories that they have, and finding ways to share those stories with as many people as possible and really sort of build community around that. But I also was really excited to be working for a company that had such a history of innovation and, being one of the first to really leverage podcasting as a medium. And, and the last thing that I think is worth mentioning is that my boss at the Moth was actually someone that I already knew, and I didn't even know that when I applied for the job. But my boss at the time was actually the partner of a professional colleague of mine from the books and publishing world, and I had actually like gone out to lunch with him once, like a year or so before I applied for the job. So when I came in and interviewed, I was like, oh yeah, no, I met you before, and so we had a really good rapport going in, and it made adjusting to what was still a new industry and sort of a new field for me a lot easier. And it also meant that when I came to him, a little under a year and a half later, and said, I love this job, but I have to resign so that I can start my own cannabis company. It meant that he received that news really graciously and was completely encouraging, as was everybody else at the company. I hadn't been there that long, but at the same time, it was clear to everybody that I wasn't leaving because I didn't love the place. I was leaving because I had an opportunity to try something new. And that was in October of 2018. That was the month that I got married. And then 2 weeks later, I put in my notice at the Moth. And 2 weeks after that, I was full-time on Fernway, and I've been full-time on Fernway ever since.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. You like to do a lot of life changes at one time, huh?
Well, I think for me, I have tried to look out for opportunities when they come around, and it's never easy to take a risk. It's never easy to take a chance, but at the same time, the fact that I was doing it with some of my best friends, and that I was doing it in I think that I remember back in those early months, the feeling of building something was just so exhilarating. And I think it can be a bit of a cliche, but I don't think that you can appreciate that cliche unless you've been one of the lucky people to actually have the opportunity to do it. And once I started doing it, my entire mood, my entire outlook changed. And I just felt like, this is it. I got to go for this. And I'm really, really glad I did, because it has been a transformative experience these last few years.
For sure. And you talked a good bit about your co-founders who aren't on the podcast today, so you got to speak for them. I didn't realize one of my initial questions was, how did your relationship begin with those guys? And you've mentioned that it began in high school. I believe it wasn't before high school, right? It was at the high school.
So Kevin, so I have three co-founders, Kit, Kevin, and David. And Kevin and I met in elementary school because he was taking violin lessons from my mom. He and I actually went to different elementary schools in the same town. But then we went to the same high school. That's also where I met Kit. And then after high school, Kit and I went to the same college, and we were actually roommates for 3 years. We shared a room for 3 years, and we still somehow like each other and want to spend time around each other. And then David, our fourth co-founder, we met him in the very early months of starting to, dream up Fernway. And what we realized in those early months was that none of us had a finance background, and we needed someone on our team who had, because we didn't know anywhere near as much as we know now at the time that we started this. But we knew that it was going to be a complex challenge, and one that was going to require us to build a financial model. And we knew nobody on this team, this team of three could do it. So it just so happened that at the time, David, who became our fourth co-founder, was a friend. He's a friend of Kit's little sister, and he was working at a hedge fund. And in his spare time, he was doing some analysis of the Canadian cannabis companies, and had developed a point of view that they were really overvalued, which I think was borne out. But
you should say so.
He'd always had an entrepreneurial spirit, and he had a couple small businesses that he started. I think one was collecting golf balls in high school, and I think that So when Kit got connected with him through his little sister and said, like, "Hey, I'm thinking of starting a cannabis company. Are you interested in maybe doing some work for us, seeing what we have going on?" He was eager to learn more, and within a few months, we were a team of four, and we had started our business. And it was, at that point, it was off to the races. So I think even though David is someone who I have not known as long as Kit and Kevin, I think I've spent more time with him, certainly over the last few years, along with Kit and Kevin, than I have with almost any of my friends, just by virtue of, being on the grind, getting this business started up and running it.
Yeah, that's a great story. Thanks for walking me through those guys. And one thing I want to note here for our listeners is, we finance a lot of small businesses and medium-sized businesses, and we've seen a lot of businesses. We look at a lot of businesses, and it's not always the case that people in an early stage understand what they don't know. And it sounds like you were self-aware enough as a group of people to go, this is something we need, and we need to bring somebody in, because that's not easy. Giving up shares and adding to a already small group of people is always dangerous. And I think a lot of people just say, well, we'll figure that piece out as we go. And I think you were smart enough to say, well, none of us know this, and we're going to bring somebody in who does. And so kudos to you guys for doing that. I'm always curious though, because I don't have co-founders, and there's trade-offs for everything, right? So a lot of times, especially now in my late years of this business, I kind of wish I had some co-founders, or somebody to bounce something off. That's I shouldn't say bounce something off, because I have a great leadership team, but somebody that has the same stakes that I have, I guess, is the best way to put it. These were your friends, especially friends from high school and college. You said you like each other and all that kind of stuff. Can you walk me through a challenge or two, though? They can't be all sunshine and roses.
Of course, no. It would be silly to imagine that everything was all good all the time. But I think that I think that one thing that we really learned, the four of us, is that we have to face down conflict, and we have to come to consensus in order for us all to feel comfortable and move forward united. And there were a number of times when we were just basically locking ourselves in a room for hours at a time, hashing out misalignments or disagreements so that we could come to a consensus and move forward. But I think that I got to be honest, I thank my lucky stars every single day. And I give this same answer when people ask, what do you think, you can point to that has been a real factor in you guys being successful? And I think the answer that I always give is that I have my three partners, and that I have my three co-founders, and that we both, provide we're a united front, but we also all have different perspectives, and we have different nuanced perspectives on challenges and opportunities. And that has been the case from the moment that we came together. And what I appreciate is that we do serve as both a check on each other, as well as encouragement and as support for each other. We've all four of us have had to learn how to do so many different things over the last few years that are outside of our skill set or comfort zone at the time. And I could not be more appreciative of having just those voices and those personalities in a room with me, so that we could, be greater than the sum of our parts. Because I think that we, all four of us, we're hard charging. We have strong opinions. We work really hard. Sometimes it can be a battle of intense personalities, but in the end, I think being able to have those personalities all united around a single idea and a single concept is a way of doing something that can be really difficult in the business world, which is finding a way to take ego out of the equation. The four of us, we've been doing this for so long, and we're so, I think, satisfied by just the act of doing, of running a business and of solving problems and summiting challenges together, that and there's no room for ego in that. There's no room for one particular personality to derail that, because number one, it's not efficient, but number two, it's not an honest accounting of what it is that you actually feel, and I think that for us, we are completely truthful with each other. We are, we're very open with each other about what, our needs, our desires. And I think that what we've been able to do together wouldn't have been possible if it was, only two or three of us. I really feel, that is the case. And I think that that's also something that is expressed and that we really try to show to our team, because the four of us, we're co-founders, and we're the C-suite, and we're the owners, and we're the operators of this business.
Right.
We are here in the office every single day. There's no job that is below us. There's no ivory towers here. And I think that is something that I really am, to be completely honest, we never considered any alternative to that. There was never going to be a world in which this business opened and we weren't, driving the van to drop off the cartridges and, capping the cartridges one right after another and solving tech support issues and screwing together office furniture and painting the walls of our vault. Like that to us, there was never any question that we were going to be doing that. And I don't say that to seem, super humble or salt of the earth, but I think that it's something that I look back on, and I know it's not the norm, but I'm so glad that we took that route because I don't think we would have wanted it any other way. And I think the results really speak for themselves.
Yeah, there's a lot there that I want to dive into a little bit, but for the most part, I mean, it's a classic story and a classic through line is that ego screws everything up. There's a certain amount of, or I shouldn't say that, a balanced ego, or the ego that the pejorative ego is what screws everything up. And you see it all over the place. And I mean, really, like even in our business, it's all about checking your ego at the door. And ego can mean a lot of things. It's not just like, oh, I'm Mr. Entrepreneur, so you have to bow to me. It goes through the organization. Everyone's got an ego. Everyone's got some sort of thing that's holding them back, some sort of head trash that's holding them back. And I find it even more fascinating. Maybe having 4 co-founders actually makes checking ego at the door a little bit easier because you have more people to check you on that. Yeah. So I find that pretty interesting too. But it's awesome to have a release valve of 3 other people who could effectively step in and do your job. And more, I say maybe even most importantly, it makes your company super, super anti-fragile. Heaven forbid something happened to one of you guys or some, it allows you to sort of not rest easy, but rest a little bit easier, in that vein. So, kudos to you guys for, navigating that dance, very, very well. It seems like, I'm sure there's plenty of times you step on each other's toes while dancing, but for the most part, it looks beautiful. So, all right, let's jump into Fernway itself. So take me back. We talked about your co-founders. Take me back to the moment Fernway first became a seed, pun intended, maybe seed in anyone's mind. Where were you and what's the deeper story around that?
Sure. Well, so, there are, I think the first thing to really underscore for the story of Fernway is that the first part of the story, the part before we launched in February 2021, is really just defined by one thing, which is waiting. And that is due to a number of reasons, which I'll get into. But the story, like the seed of Fernway was really planted in late 2017. That's when Kit and Kevin, so we were all living in New York. Kevin had moved up from Atlanta to take a job in New York. And he had gone to Atlanta after college. So he'd been living down there. He came to New York. It was the first time that the 3 of us were in the city together. And so it was great to, finally be able to hang out again. And I was hanging out with them one night and they said, hey, we've been talking about starting a business. And, Kit at the time he was an attorney. Kevin was a management consultant, and they both were happy in their careers. They both were, had risen to the point that they wanted to. And, they'd done the spostas. But they were talking about, hey, maybe we might want to leave our jobs and start a business together. And I said, I don't think that that's something that if any of my other friends were to tell me, I would have been, people who I'd known as long as them, if they were to say to me that I would have that would have caught my ear. But when they said it, because of who they were and because of, our relationship, I was like, yeah, tell me more. And so we started talking, and we didn't have an exact idea of what we wanted to do. We knew we wanted to start a business, and we knew that there was an opportunity in cannabis, and that opportunity was in Massachusetts, because Massachusetts had voted in late 2016 to legalize, but the dispensaries hadn't opened up yet at that point. Mm-hmm. So we started to, as you do, you start Googling, you start reading articles, and Kit and Kevin had heard about this trade show that was going on in Boston in March 2018. And so they said, do you want to go? And I said, yeah, sure. Why not? It's a fact-finding mission. So we drove from New York to Boston, one cold March morning. And we spent the next 2 days at the show just absorbing every single piece of information that we could, just trying to be sponges. And it just so happened that that day that we showed up at the show was also the day that the draft cannabis regulations were published for public consumption. And that was a really exciting moment for everyone at the show, because everyone was abuzz over what what these regulations would mean. And everyone who was at the show was asking questions of the panelists and the speakers, saying like, hey, what's your feeling about this part of the regulations? And, what should I be preparing for based on this part of the regulations? So it was a perfect moment for us to just completely dive into what became our new world. And what we came away from the show realizing were a couple things that turned out to be true. And the first of them was that there was an opportunity to build a cannabis company in Massachusetts without having limitless wealth and, VC backing and being a giant conglomerate, because of the way that the law was structured. There weren't going to be a tiny amount of licenses given out to only a few privileged players. It really was a level, or I should say an open playing field. And that really encouraged us. And the second thing that we decided, just sort of studying the various regulations and listening to people talk, is that we wanted to focus on product manufacturing, because none of us were cultivators, and none of us were retail experts. I've worked retail before, but I didn't necessarily relish going back. And so product manufacturing was the vertical that we started to focus on. And soon enough, the vision for what Fernway became, which was a company that makes vape cartridges and sells them under their own brand, and operates in Massachusetts and sells wholesale to dispensaries, that idea came into focus pretty quick, and it never really went away. So I think that what started happening after that show is that we came back with a fire lit under us, and we said, all right, it's time to start actually chasing this down. And I think we approached the process like a puzzle that we needed to solve. We were educating ourselves about a brand new industry. There were a ton of people that were trying to get in, but there's a lot of, whether it be misinformation or just lack of information out there on what to do, how to do it. And, I'll never forget that at the show that we went to, which was the New England Cannabis Convention, NECAN in Boston, I was listening to an attorney give a talk about local approvals and what was necessary in order to get the town that would be the host of your cannabis business to sign off on your use, which in Massachusetts requires a unique type of contract called a host community agreement that every cannabis business has to negotiate with their host municipality. And someone in the audience raised their hand and said, hey, how do I know which municipalities in Massachusetts are friendly and are willing to, take my meeting? And the lawyer said, well, if you're my client, I'll tell you. And I heard that and I thought, you know what? I bet I can figure this out. And I just so happened to, like a month or so after that, I was on a vacation going to see family out west, and I had some free time to kill. And I just pulled a list of every municipality in Massachusetts, and I just started going down the list, and I would go to town websites. I would email city planners. I would read local news articles, and I just documented all of the different municipalities and their different, laws or bylaws. And I created a little data visualization, and that data visualization ended up actually pointing us to the host municipality where we currently are, which is Northampton, because it was sort of at the top of the heap in terms of friendly towns. So that was where we ended up finding our property. So that was like I said, that was early 2018, and then flash forward to October. I get married. 2 weeks after that, I quit my job, and it was it's hard sometimes to remember how quickly things were moving back then, but for me, I knew by the time that I got back from that convention that I was going to do this. And, I talked to my fiance, then wife, or my then fiance, now wife, after I got back from the show. And I said, like, hey, I got to be honest with you. I think this is a real thing, and I think we can do this. And I was all prepared to address objections and persuade. And she just said, that sounds great. I think you should do it.
Nothing like a great partner in life, huh?
Absolutely.
Thinking back to when I started my business, I probably had a little more knowledge going into it than you, but I almost feel like that's a hindrance in some ways. It's like the dumber you are at whatever you're about to start, the more you learn quickly and you don't have preconceived notions. So, you just telling that story, it's like, well, why do I have to be that guy's client? I can figure this out. Whereas
Yeah.
somebody else may have thought, oh yeah, I guess I have to sign up with this guy and figure out how to do this. Obviously we're cut to today, 2022, and many more states have legalized, many more cannabis companies have grown since you guys started. What was it like then? And you already talked a little bit about this, so you don't have to spend a ton of time on it. But I'm sure our listeners would love to hear some of the nuts and bolts surrounding starting a cannabis company. You already talked about you have to find a host city or host municipality to, at least in Massachusetts, to agree to allow you to have that business there. And anything else that it would be interesting for our listeners of starting a cannabis company, especially when you don't know anything about what you're doing?
I would love to, because this was something that I realized I've really come to take seriously over the last few years, which is that knowledge about the challenges of getting into the cannabis industry should not be something that people keep to themselves. I think that those challenges should be really public. People should know what they are before they go into the industry, because there are a lot of people who set down the path to open a cannabis business without an understanding of the true challenges ahead of them. And a lot of people end up having misfortune as a result, or getting in over their head. And I think that I'm really thankful that me and my team were able to face down those challenges, but it was by no means a foregone conclusion. So in Massachusetts, like I said, it is an open playing field, but it's not a level playing field. And that is because though the expenses that you need to absorb and cover to be able to apply for a cannabis license are relatively small. I mean, relative to, for example, other business expenses. I think there's, there's licensing fees where you're paying like $5,000 to $10,000 to get that license, and that's certainly not nothing. But at the same time, compared to the costs of a lot of commercial businesses, it's relatively small. However, there are a lot of hidden costs in the process of getting a cannabis license. So I'll try to be concise about it, because this is one of my favorite subjects to nerd out about. So
let's do it.
I'm going to try not to get too much in the weeds, pun not intended. So the way that it works in Massachusetts is that you need to get a license in order to operate a cannabis business. That's the case in every state that has legalized so far. You need to get a license from the state that, the state needs to deem you eligible and appropriate to be able to run that business.
Can I raise my hand first real quick?
Yeah,
Just real quick, raise hand. Do you have to decide what type of cannabis company you want to be before you apply for the license?
Yes. Okay, so the licenses are all different categories. So we applied for a product manufacturer license. If you want to cultivate, you have to get a cultivation license. If you want to be a retailer, a retail license, transportation licenses, delivery licenses, testing lab licenses. Anytime that you are plant touching, as they say, which is handling the actual product, you need to have a license. And depending on what you're planning on doing with it, that dictates what kind of license you get, as well as the different parts of the regulations that you're subject to. And so in order to get a license in Massachusetts, you need to submit an application. In order to submit an application, you need two things. You need a host community agreement, and you need a piece of real estate. And the piece of real estate does not have to be one that you own. It can be one that you lease. However, for the most part, there are a lot of challenges when it comes to securing real estate for a cannabis company. There are a lot of landlords that won't rent to cannabis tenants because they either are opposed to the industry, they don't want to take the risk, or because they are actually subject to the terms of their bank that actually owns the building. And many banks that are federally backed will not allow cannabis tenants in their buildings. So you're already starting at a slight disadvantage when it comes to securing real estate. Additionally, you have to get that host community agreement, like I said. And though the city of Northampton has been, as far as I'm concerned, like a model city when it comes to issuing host community agreements and being transparent about them, and not, extorting people for them or putting companies through just absolutely insane runarounds and putting people in a position where they basically have to choose to either spend their life savings waiting for the town to sign an agreement or to try to start over. Northampton has not done any of that, and it's been wonderful to operate there. But we could have easily chosen a different city and made a poor decision on that front and ended up basically, wasting tons of time and burning a lot of money in the process. Because what you have to do is you have to lease that real estate, and then you get a host community agreement. And that there's no guarantee of how long it takes to get that host community agreement once you sign that lease. So you start paying rent day one. There's no guarantee for when you'll get that host community agreement or if you'll get that host community agreement. Then you have to submit an application to the state. And the application is quite complicated. Ours was 100 single spaced pages. And there's a lot of paperwork that you have to provide, a lot of narratives about how you're going to run the business. And the state needs a high degree, the state wants to have a high degree, a high threshold that you want to meet in order to get a license, which is understandable. Ultimately, the state is concerned with rolling out a regulated industry, and they want to be selective about who gets the license, in the sense that they want to be able to say, will this, group be able to, handle the regulations and be compliant? So I certainly don't fault the state for doing their due diligence on applicants. But what ends up happening is you submit your license application. And for us, we submitted our license application to the state in May of 2019. And would you like to guess when we got the license?
Let's say Feb of 2020 is my guess.
It was May of 2020. We waited a year to get that license. And here's the thing. When you get that license, that's not a license to open up and start doing business. It's what's called a provisional license. And that provisional license, what that provisional license is not permission to do business. It's permission to start renovating your building. So you go from, in our case, a year plus of paying rent on a commercial building with no business activity to commencing a expensive renovation to be able to get that building ready to commence operations in. So that means, making sure that there is appropriate security and cameras and access control. It means building a vault that is secure to store product in. It means ensuring that there is sufficient space to store everything and to grow into. And again, none of these were things that we begrudged because we knew that we had to do them. But the hidden costs were that you have to wait, and you have to wait a long time, because ultimately it's up to the state when they approve your application, or if they approve your application. So
right, that's the big risk there is what if they say no?
Yes. So
that's a huge risk.
Once you get that provisional license, you start renovating your building. If you were a company that just had an empty lot, you'd have to start building your building. We finished our renovations after a few months, and then we had to go through another round of inspections. And that round of inspections then sets you up to get your final license. Now, in Massachusetts, they only issue the licenses once a month. And they do that on the dates that the commission meets to vote on the licenses, which is part of the law. And so we were so eager to get our final inspection done before the licensing meeting so that we wouldn't have to then wait another month. And we weren't able to, so we were, and the meeting was going to be at the beginning of December, and we had our inspection done mid-November. I think it was the week of Thanksgiving. And we were on the phone with our inspector, pleading with him, please, whatever it is that you need from us, we will make sure that it happens. If you need any extra paperwork or documentation, whatever you need to be able to get your inspection paperwork done, we were happy to do. And then December rolled around and they canceled the meeting. So we had hired our first 4 employees, and we thought that we're going to go into production a week later. And instead it was going to be at least a 4 to 5 week wait. So we gave our 4 employees a generous vacation around the holidays, because this was in December. And we did a lot of preparing. And in retrospect, all this time that I'm talking about, all the time that we spent waiting for our license, for our building to get renovated, to start production, we use that time. We use that time to prepare and define our SOPs and develop our brand and develop our products and to lay the groundwork and build sales relationships. We kept busy, but at the same time, we had to keep busy, because otherwise I think we would have gone insane. And so that, I think, is, what I would say to people who are pursuing a cannabis license anywhere, is that you can read the regulations and you can understand what you need to do in order to satisfy the state's requirements. But the number one thing you're going to have to be thinking about is time. and how much time you are going to need to take to get through this process, and whether or not you have the funds and the resources to get through it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, on behalf of our listeners, I'll thank you for a masterclass in starting a business and getting a cannabis license there. But you just led me to my next question, which was, and this will be, coming from a finance company here, this will be my only question about finance in this whole interview is, how did you go about financing your company given the industry you were in? We would love to finance cannabis, and we or finance cannabis related companies, and we are working towards that, and we think we have a few avenues to do that. I know a few companies that already do it right now. They're more focused on real estate and pieces of equipment than the financing of the cannabis business itself. So how did you finance your company during that time?
It's a good question. So some of your listeners may know that because cannabis is still federally unlawful, you can't get a bank loan. You can't go to
Right.
you can't go to Chase Bank and get a small business loan for your cannabis startup.
Can't even go to me.
Exactly. And there is some debt available to cannabis clients, more so than there used to be, but a lot of that debt is very expensive and comes with some pretty gnarly restrictions and covenants. And I think that it's not really a meaningful source of capital for most cannabis startups. So most cannabis startups do what we did, which is sell equity in the company, and do that by an equity raise that we targeted toward our friends and family. And we said, you're people who have known us for many years. You've seen, you've known us since we were kids, and we have this idea, and this is what we're going to do with it. And do you trust us? And we were fortunate enough to have enough friends and family who trusted us and believed in our vision to be able to raise a seed round. And that in turn was the money that we ended up spending on, branding and product development and paying that lease off and getting ourselves to the point where we could actually open up our doors and start running a business. And I think that, I think our investors are really happy with how things turned out, but they took a chance on us. And I think that was for us, because this was our friends and family, because these were people who, we were going to be seeing at Thanksgiving, and, who had known us our entire lives, who we loved and had connections to beyond, them being our investors. It made us feel even more pressure to perform and to make this thing work, because we didn't want to disappoint them. We don't want to disappoint any investor, but when there is an investor who is, friends with your parents and knew you in elementary school and is, has maybe seen you when you were like a gangly teen and still thinks like, hey, it's worth throwing in to support this dream. It made us feel it made us take extremely seriously all of the challenges that came about. And there were a couple major challenges that got thrown into our path between raising that first round and opening our doors.
Right. And I think part of the beauty, in some respects, especially in hindsight, of having friends and family as your investors is that you do look at it as your own money and not other people's money, right? You treat it with you treat it with more respect than your own money, I think. Whereas you can see all these just look at WeWork or anything like that. You raise billions and billions of dollars of other people's money. Who cares if you spend it on tequila, right? I mean, nobody cares at that point. So pretty interesting how you guys managed that first year of the process and getting your doors open. So let's talk a little bit of product here as we wrap up a bit. So what is it about the Fernway product?
I've got like 15 more minutes, so I'm happy to go over if you are.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Perfect. So, yeah, same here. So what is it about the Fernway product that makes it elevated compared to others? And let me pause and let me give why I want to ask that question. Obviously, this podcast is all about people who made different choices, right? And right now there is a race to the bottom in terms of pricing and product and things like that, trying to get people in the stores, trying to buy the product. And, some companies choose to make and my word is elevated here, however you want to put it, you can, but an elevated product versus the others out there, which may cost more, which may be harder to get and harder to produce and all those things. So what is it about the Fernway cannabis vaping cartridge that makes it elevated to others, I guess?
I would love to tell you. And, part of this is going to be me dusting off the sales pitch that I used to give over and over and over again. It happens to still be true, which is wonderful.
Perfect.
Although we've expanded our offerings, so I'm no longer saying, yeah, we have 6 SKUs. So I think that I'd say that there are two major things that go into driving the quality and defining the quality of our product. And one of them is pretty nuts and bolts, and the other is a little bit more abstract. So the thing that's nuts and bolts is that we design everything ourselves in-house. Everything from our packaging to our hardware to our merchandise to all of our brand materials to the terpene blends that we use in our cartridges. Like everything is made by us, defined by us, and perfected by us. We're extremely fastidious. We're very high standards when it comes to developing our products and our brand. And I think having that creative control was something that we knew was going to be a pretty steep challenge, because there are, for example, a lot of elements of our business that require going direct to manufacturer and working with people who are overseas, who maybe are on different time zones or speak different languages. But we knew that by facing down that challenge and really taking control and ownership of every aspect of our product, that we were going to be able to create something that was different and something that was special, and not have to compromise on our journey from concept to prototype to final product. And
what does a compromise look like? Sorry about that. I didn't mean to talk over you there.
No, it's a great question. So I think a compromise in our world of cannabis vapes, is there are a lot of companies that are American based, and they're distributors of product that's made in China. And so what they do is they have a curated catalog of options, and they sell to manufacturers like us. And that, as a result, means that most manufacturers are buying off the rack. And so when you go to a dispensary and you notice that, like, these cartridges all look the same, and all the packaging kind of looks the same. I mean, it's the same shape, maybe a different color with a different label, but like, for the most part, you end up with a really non-differentiated product. And that was something that we knew we couldn't, as a small company, as one that was breaking into a space that already had big players in it, we knew we couldn't afford a non-differentiated product. So we took the route of designing everything ourselves, going, from the ground up, working directly with these manufacturers, not working with distributors, and really creating something that was bespoke, and having a vision that, it took us longer, and it meant that we spent more money, but in retrospect, it was what allowed us to feel completely confident in the product we were bringing to market. So that's the nuts and bolts part of what makes our product, what elevates our product, I should say, to use your phrase.
Elevates it. Perfect.
And, what I mean by that too is that, like, we know every single aspect of our product, and every single aspect is fine tuned, because we work directly with the manufacturer who can make those changes for us, and who can work with us to really develop a superior product, whether it's the resistance of the heating element, or the material that we use for our steel, which we use 304 stainless steel, which is a more premium and slightly more expensive steel compared to 303, which is used in most vape cartridges. The design of the outside, the fact that all of our cartridges have a little band around it with the name of the flavor or the strain printed on it. The fact that we have a custom mouthpiece that's unique to us. Like, all of this was something that took months of planning and execution to be able to pull off. But I'm really glad that we decided down that road, and we never at any point entertained buying something off the rack, because that, I think, was necessary for us to not only feel confident about the product, but to be able to go to the dispensary that had a lot of non-differentiated products and say, hey, this is new, this is premium, and have them believe us. It really helped us build our credibility.
Yeah, I talk about that all the time about 12.5. Like, when I started this business, I was 23 years old, so I had to borrow money at a very high rate and then lend it out at an even higher rate. So I could not compete with people on price, right? And so by not being able to compete on price, you have to compete somewhere else. And so I decided to compete on culture and values, and being a lender of first resort instead of a lender of last resort. And it sounds exactly like what you guys did. I'm curious. So I very much look at the health.
Sorry, there's one more thing that I want to mention. So that's the nuts and bolts thing. The abstract part of what I think elevates our product is that all four of the Fernway co-founders, we all get high. We're all passionate cannabis consumers. We we are passionate about the product. We're passionate about recreational consumption. We've been doing it for
Mm-hmm.
years together and apart. And that was the sensibility that we brought to developing our product and saying, all right, we don't want to just make this better than what's in the market. We want to make this good enough for our customer. And I think having an extremely close understanding of what our customer actually wants and what is actually on their mind versus the sort of groupthink of the industry was a way for us to avoid, I think, a non-differentiated product and avoid sort of sliding into cliche with our brand and with our positioning. And it's something that, again, throughout the, as we like every day at this company, like I am thankful that we keep the customer in mind all the time. And again, a lot of companies are customer first, as they should be. And in our case, I don't think that is something that makes us, different or special. What I do think is that in the cannabis industry, there's a lot of ideas about what the customer wants, which are not really reflective of the reality on the ground. And we choose to do the hard work of actually understanding what the customer wants and then building a product around that. And that in turn has been, that makes the product design process a lot more streamlined because we're not asking the question of like, oh, does that look good? Is that going to, look good on the shelf? It's like, hey, our customer is going to appreciate this. Are they actually going to care about this? Because if they do, then we should do it. And if they won't, then we shouldn't.
And by customer, when you're asking that question, a normal person would go, oh, well, then I have to ask a customer. But you can ask yourselves because like you said, you are the customer. You are the one that says, what is out there right now is not good enough for me. And so what do I want to create? Because I'm in the place to create something. So I find that really, really interesting. And being so passionate about it, I think is what helps you to be able to, move past just the speaking of customer first. Because that you mentioned that a lot of companies are customer first, and I think a lot of companies say they're customer first. It's very easy to say, "Oh, we're great culture and customer service." Like until you actually get into it and see what they do, it's the same thing in our industry too. So I appreciate hearing about the passion, and I tend to go. When it comes to the cannabis side of things, I look at the health and wellness side of it. And these segments keep gravitating towards cannabis as an alternative to dangerous things like alcohol. Then on the other side of that, you read all the horror stories of vaping lung injuries and scary things like that. So how do you factor those things in, right? Like you've got this real push for the health and wellness aspect of cannabis. And does that play into your guys' marketing and how you build your product, the health and wellness side of it?
We call ourselves a pure recreational brand because that's what we are. We're not doctors. We're not physicians. We don't give or dispense medical advice. We're not qualified to do so. And we also really are focused on the recreational consumer and the recreational experience, the person who enjoys cannabis because it makes them feel good, because it, as we say, it makes the good life even better. And there are a lot of medical brands out there. And there are also a lot of brands that make claims of medical benefit, which I think are fairly specious. And at Fernway, we don't do any of that because we know what we're about and we're not going to bullshit you. We're going to tell you that. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say something. I was going to say I appreciate the honest answer there, because just speaking from experience, certainly from a sleep standpoint and a consumption standpoint, is far less impactful than cannabis, or I'm sorry, than alcohol. But there's still the stigma around cannabis, right? It's such an ingrained thing, especially here in America. It's funny because even I know the history, right? But it's hard not to let yourself get caught up in the stigma if you haven't been a user for many, many years or a consumer of that. So how do you guys look at that and how do you push back on that stigma?
Well, so, none of us are skeptical of the medical benefits of cannabis. I'm actually a medical cannabis patient myself in Massachusetts. But for us, we focus on recreational experience because it's something that we can speak to. And we also don't think that it is spoken to enough in this space. There are a lot of brands that try to have it both ways. They try to be medical and recreational. And the fact of the matter is that those are two totally different use cases. They're two totally different needs. If you're someone who, for example, is suffering from chronic pain or insomnia, then sure, you may be able to, have a good time and, watch a movie, taking your medicinal cannabis, but you're looking for relief. And the customer that we target is someone who is not looking for relief from symptoms, but is looking to improve something that's already good, make the good life even better, whether it's, their favorite food, their favorite experience, their favorite, group of friends. And so, there are medical dispensaries that sell our product, and we hear from people all the time who get medical benefit from our product. And we think that's fantastic. But ultimately, that's personal to them. It's not something that we're pushing them into, or making them feel like they need to feel a certain way with our product. If they get benefit from it, then that's something that is deeply moving to us. But it's not something that we are putting first, because it's not something that we feel is really our place to do. It's ultimately it's a personal choice, and it's something that I think that, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done to be able to specifically understand the medicinal benefit of cannabis, even though it is clear that it has medicinal benefit and should be available as medicine. And I think it's also that has been the way that people find acceptance and they get over that stigma. But what I would say, in terms of pushing back against that stigma, we're not we are an anti-stigma brand, but we're not on our soapbox about it. Instead, we prefer to persuade people by providing them something that's compelling. So that is, a really premium look and feel for that product. It is really premium flavor, because we're, so fastidious about our terpene blends and making sure that they taste delicious and consistent. And it's also creating a brand that celebrates good times and good vibes. And I think that is, for some people, something that they're really looking for. They're looking to not, for example, like be given explicit permission to be said, to be told like, you are now allowed to consume, but they want to be given permission to enjoy, and they want to be given permission to have fun. And instead of saying we're giving you permission, we just say, hey, we're having fun. Join us. It's really simple. It's really simple to have fun. And we kind of think of our brand as like that friend who's a little bit more experienced than you, who's never going to peer pressure you, but knows you, knows you intimately, and says, hey, I think you might like this, and hands you, a new vape and says, hey, press the button, take a hit.
I think you just landed the plane there, because like there's a ton that we talked about there and you mentioned, but landing that plane of being that friend who has been there before, who can explain it and make somebody feel comfortable. What you also do is you're creating a product that is a high end enough where if somebody is nervous about trying or has read terrible articles about off market vaping and, black market vaping and things like that, you're creating a product that says, hey, we put everything into this. You talked about the steel, you talked about the terpenes, you talked about this, like knowing that and being able to read about that, I think is what gives people that comfort level of going, okay, this is where I can dip my toes in. So appreciate that answer there. Just sort of wrapping up here a little bit. The cannabis industry is blowing up, I would say, in terms of consumption. You read articles that it's more popular than smoking in the United States now.
Actually, Ryan, I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to just go back to something that you mentioned about the dangers of unlicensed and unregulated vapes, because I do think that that's something that we take very seriously. And we take it seriously not just because it's our industry, but because we were actually we were in the process of waiting for our license when there was a rash of vape injuries and, in fact, a few deaths across the United States in late 2019. And the state of Massachusetts banned all vapes, nicotine, cannabis, everything. And our business opportunity went from this to zero. And we had just told the state we were going to start a vape company. We had told our friends and family we had raised money to start a vape company. And we suddenly had to start from zero. And we had to start over because we didn't know what was going to happen with that ban. And what later ended up coming out from the research and reporting around those vape injuries is that what was happening was there were poisoned vapes that were being sold on the unlicensed market that were diluted with this additive, vitamin E acetate, that was something that would not be possible and would not be allowable to be added to any of the vapes that are sold in a regulated market like Massachusetts. And so I think that was a real wake-up call for a lot of people who might have been on the fence about cannabis regulation to say, hey, you do actually need rules and safety and analysis and testing of these products to make sure that people are still safe and that they're not being exposed to danger. And so, I think that and that also really for us put a lot of steel in our spine, because we see Fernway as the solution to that problem by being a regulated vape brand, by being one that, is held to the highest standard of purity and of testing, and by, again, taking this completely bespoke approach so that we know every single thing that goes into our product. We really, again, it was a scary time, both for people who vape and for companies like us that were, trying to break into that industry. But we came out of it with an even greater resolve to build a product that people could be confident on, that they could count on, and also an even greater resolve that we were in the right industry, because this was an opportunity for us to be able to give people a product that they could trust and that would really help direct them away from what still is a pretty dangerous marketplace, which is the unregulated vape marketplace. So anyway, I just wanted to share that because it's a topic that I hold really dear, and didn't want to stop before I had the opportunity.
I'm glad you pulled the thread on that, and thank you for saying that, because I talked to a lot of people about this, and it's really about educating people on
absolutely.
On not headline, just like everything in life is, people go off headlines, but you can't go off headlines. You have to really understand the nuance of it. So I appreciate you saying that. And honestly, you got me to the point where I wanted to kind of get to, which was this idea that this thing you've created is the answer to those things, right? It is the thing that makes people feel safe. You're building that trust with them. So kudos for you for interrupting me there and making sure you got that answer in, because that's what I was looking for. Okay, so lastly, cannabis industry is blowing up, state by state as it goes. New legalization coming every year, yet it's still, like I said, balkanized by the states. It looks like, I'm crossing my fingers for my business that the Safe Banking Act goes through so we can start financing businesses a little bit easier and things like that. Two questions. How do you guys plan on managing future growth and expansion? Where are you headed? Do you plan to go into other states? And then second, what is something, I ask it every time on the show, what is something you wish your colleagues and competitors would stop doing?
It's a good question. I think I'll answer the second question first. I think that, if there's something that I wish people in the industry would stop doing, it is, thinking uncritically about the common wisdom that exists out there. Really, I think I wish people would develop their own point of view, and that they would really battle test that point of view. And I think that that's something that I've had the privilege to be able to do from my position, running this company, but it's not something that you have to run a company to be able to do. There's a lot of really incredible writers and thinkers out there who are covering this space, and we're still very much at the beginning of it. This is, I always think this is like, the beginning of the 20th century when it came to things like, electricity and oil and sound recording and automobiles, and like, to think that everything and to not question that is just foolish. And I just wish that more people would just be a little bit more humble, just when it comes to the certainty that they have. But at the same time, I also understand that in a high risk industry, sometimes you just have to trust yourself. So I certainly don't begrudge people for believing in themselves, but I think it's something that I've found to be really helpful, is just to really test and validate your point of view, and to find people who will trouble that and let them talk to you and hear them out, and discover, between that and your initial point of view, a compromise that may in fact be closer to the truth. Awesome. So the first question of where our eyes are set. So we just actually got a conditional manufacturing license in New Jersey. So we're really excited to expand to New Jersey. I have a bunch of people who message us on Instagram all the time who say like, hey, come to New Jersey. And I'm so glad that I finally get to tell them, hey, guess what? It's happening.
I'm coming to New Jersey.
Yeah. And I think that for us, we see the opportunity in building ourselves a presence here in the Northeast, where there's just so much enthusiasm for cannabis, but there's also still such an undeveloped culture around it. And I think that we really see an opportunity to help build and elevate that culture from our position as a cannabis brand. There's a lot of trust that people put in cannabis brands to be able to point them in the right direction and to be able to provide them with accurate information. And we take that responsibility seriously. And I think that, as Northeasterners, as people who love this region, who are from this region, I think that we have an opportunity to really build something special here in the Northeast. So I think, if there's any place that you can find Fernway outside of Massachusetts, it's probably going to be around here.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, that's awesome. I'm confident you guys will be the ones to do it. I have a million other questions, but we'll have to save that for another podcast. So I'm going to get to the final questions, the fast four. Other than what you're doing right now, what other profession or business would you like to take a stab at?
Oh, good question. I think that it's silly because I think that this would probably be even more challenging than my current business. But I would love to. I would love to run a bakery.
Awesome. Awesome. What kind of, just quickly, what kind of like breads, cookies, pastries? What are we thinking?
Bagels. There are not enough good bagels in the Northeast outside of some of the major cities, It's just something like you don't need the special New York water. You do not need special dough. You don't need special machines. You just need to have the will and the dream. That's all it takes. And if I could bring good bagels to places outside of, New York City, then I would love to do that.
That's awesome. I love it. What's something you are terrible at?
Oh God, I am terrible at estimating the amount of people in a room. If you were to be like, how many people are in this convention hall or how many people are in this conference room? It's just like, it's a 404 error up there. I have no idea.
That might be the best answer I've gotten so far on this short podcast of ours.
I've had to come to terms with it.
What book or documentary are you reading or watching right now?
I am reading one of the most satisfying books I've ever read, and I'm only about halfway through it, which is the first of the 4-volume Lyndon Johnson biography by Robert Caro.
Oh, yeah.
The first book is called The Path to Power, and I'm at the part where he's a congressman in Washington during FDR's New Deal, and he's sort of building the pieces that he'll need to make the jump to being a senator. And it is one of the most fascinating narratives I've ever read. Caro's a master.
Isn't it incredible? Incredible. And the fact that he can do 4 books on Johnson and they be that enthralling is incredible.
He's got the 5th one in the works, but he's also 86. So I know I'm on tenterhooks right now.
Let's go, bro. Okay, last thing. What's the last thing you listen to? And if you have to look at your phone, you can. What's the last thing you listen to on Spotify or Apple Music?
I have a favorite podcast on Spotify, which is called Bandsplain, and it is a look at a particular artist or band's discography. And the guest for every episode is different. And the guest is someone who loves that band. And they go through the entire discography and they play certain selected tracks. And because it's on Spotify, it switches from like talk to the song to talk to the song.
Oh, cool.
So it's a really cool interface. The show is wonderful. I'm listening to the episode about Weezer right now. I've never known more about Weezer than now in my life.
Oh man, I'm checking that one out for sure. I'll put it in the show notes for everybody too. Cool. Well, Liam, this has been awesome. I've really, really enjoyed it. Thank you for spending time with us today.
Too.
Been super fun and educational. Where can people find you online and get in touch?
Hit us up. We're on the internet, of course. We are at fernway.com and we're also on Instagram. Our profile is just Fernway. And you can also find us. I'd say those are probably the best spots to find us on the internet. But if you're in Massachusetts, we are in a ton of dispensaries. We're in, I think, over 170. So if you go on our website and you look for the dispensary near you, then you'll be able to find our products. And if you like what you see and you like what you taste, or if you don't, drop us a note. We love to hear from our fans.
Awesome. That is so good. Thank you so much for the time. And we look forward to seeing you guys grow.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate
Take care.
it. Bye.